everyone, my name is Natalie. Today I'm going to do my June wrap-up. So I read 8 books in June. I also wanted to mention one book that I read in the month of May and that was not part of the BookTube prize, so I never got around to talking about it officially in a wrap-up. Lightkeepers by Geni was the only book actually that I finished during the Springathon. I've finished a few others related to the Springathon in the month of June. I loved this book. It is set on the Farallon Islands, located very close to California. The only people living on the island are a team of scientists, so a few of them study the bird population on the island, some of them study the seals, and some of them study the sharks. The story basically starts when a nature photographer joins the team on the island to do her work, and she becomes entangled with the relationships on the island, and there's a mystery at the core of this book. There's a lot of tension, and a lot of the tension comes from both the human drama within the island and the group dynamic, and especially because they're so isolated, everything is so heightened, everything that they're feeling, because they can't escape it. There's a lot of atmosphere because of the setting itself. The island is sort of a stormy location. It has its own life, and a lot of the time it is ferocious and not necessarily a nice place to be. It's very dangerous in times because of the way that nature is so wild on the island. I loved the setting of this one, so I haven't stopped thinking about it since I finished it. I love the mystery as well, and the characterization, and interesting relationship between the characters, and the way that the group changes over time as well. But I think in particular the thing that really completely made me fall in love with this book was the setting itself, and that is why I've been looking for more books set or about the Farallon Islands. So if you have any recommendations, feel free to share them. I didn't love everything about the way that the story unfolded. There were a few things in particular with the ending that I talked about in the reading vlog where I mentioned this book. But yeah, a really strong fiction read of the year for sure. Then I'm going to talk about the books that I don't have physical copies of so that I don't forget about them. So first we have Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America by Michael Eric Dyson. I listened to the audiobook, which is also narrated by the author. This was really visceral. It's a book about racism, as you can tell from the title. And especially I think about the emotional experience of racism and constantly having to fight your case, constantly having to be the strong, hardworking person. It's very informative about the structural and systematic racism, and some parts about the history of race in the US as well. I feel like there's sort of two things about this book. In part, it's a call for action and a very strong challenge to make people do something, do anything that actively is working against racism. The other part, I think, is trying to convey the emotional experience of racism and the many ways that it burdens someone. I just found that it was very visceral, as I said, very intelligent and honestly portrayed. It's quite angry, and I think that is one of its benefits. It's especially strong if you're listening to the audiobook. So I thought this was fantastic, and I would definitely recommend it. The other book that I don't have a physical copy of is Wow, No Thank You by Samantha Irby. This was so fun. It was probably one of the most fun experiences I've had with reading this year. She writes essays about health, about racism and race, about politics, about work. She writes some things about her writing process and becoming a writer and author, and she talks about relationships and sex and sexuality, friendship, so many areas of her life, and she's so honest and completely she sort of lowers all of her guards and really allows you to become familiar with her in a really intimate way, and I just really appreciated that about this book. But the thing that just makes this such a fun experience is her humor with everything that she talks about. A lot of the time I found it very relatable because some experiences that she talks about is sort of my experience with anxiety, and I think the relatability made it even more enjoyable and sort of almost like a sigh of relief in a way. I just really enjoyed this, and this was my first Samantha Irby. The only thing that sort of lowered this one down is that it's slightly uneven in the tone, which is not necessarily an issue maybe if you're reading a physical copy, but it's a bit jarring when you're listening to the audiobook. And the other thing is that there's quite a few lists in the book, and again, this is more of a problem when you're listening to the audiobook and you're hearing her say the same sentence beginnings over and over again because she's doing a list. It's not a perfect collection, but a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to reading more of Samantha Irby's works. So then we have my physical books. I've actually read a few books from my TBR this month, which I haven't actually been reading a lot of my own books this year for some reason. I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks. I've been reading library books and ebooks and e-galleys. So that's definitely something that I want to start working on in the rest of the year. But this was one of the ones that I read for the Springathon. It is A Sting in the Tail by David Goulson, and this is a book, a natural history about bumblebees. So I really enjoyed the parts about the bumblebees themselves. I found a lot of the learning about bumblebees, their characteristics, their nature. Like, for example, bumblebees have the same body temperature as humans, which I find fascinating, and the costs of that for the bumblebees is also really interesting to me. He talks about the kind of plants and flowers that they need in order to thrive as a population and as individual bees. He talks about bumblebee behavior and group dynamics and genetics. There are, however, a few things about this book that I did not like. One of the things I've already mentioned in my reading vlogs when I was reading this one, and that is his so he talks in the prologue about his budding interest in nature and how he's sort of experimenting on animals, and there's a lot of iffy things and basically animal abuse that he does unintentionally, but still it has the same effect. I was fine since it was just a small part of the book, but then you get to see how his attitude towards animals is sort of reflected in his research as well. So he talks about the studies that he does, often painful experiments or even resulting in death for the bumblebees, but the issues that he talks about in terms of ethics or in terms of any other kind of issues is only whether the population is safe in numbers or not. So I feel like there's sort of a disconnect for me, because I feel like at least there should be some kind of consideration of creating intentional pain for animals. If you're studying them for the process of helping them and of saving the population, you should care if your actions have negative impact on them. I feel like at least it should be part of the calculation, the fact that the experiments themselves might not be ethically motivated, and at least that it should be more complicated than just sort of trying things out and see what happens. I'm definitely going to keep it because there's fascinating tidbits, and from previous research as well, not just his own. But the research methods themselves and his attitude and his way of writing about his research is iffy at best. So there's that. Then quite early in the month I read English Animals by Lara Kay. So this is a novel focusing on a married couple in the British countryside, and a young girl starts working for them as an assistant to the husband's taxidermy business. So she becomes part of their little group. They live in a very isolated place. They don't have a lot of friends close to them, and the relationship, the married couple itself is quite strained, their relationship. They have a lot of issues and they seem to be fighting a lot, and this new woman coming to live with them sort of creates a new dynamic in the house, and she becomes fast friends with the husband Richard and becomes more than friends with the wife Sophie. So Mirka is the woman who starts working for them. The relationship between all three characters and the fact that they are so intertwined in this house, and they're so close quarters in the house, and because they're so isolated, there's a lot of claustrophobia in this one as well. It's not like the husband is pure bad and a villain or something, and Mirka comes and saves Sophie. Instead, Sophie becomes closer to Richard almost through her relationship with Mirka, and Mirka also has a lot of respect and positive feelings towards Richard, so it's a much more complicated love triangle. So I just really enjoyed this one. I think I actually wrote a review of this one, so I will link that below. I think it might be the only written review that I've done this month. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. It isn't a flawless book, and you can tell there's a few things that's typical debut novel-y to me. Overall, it was just a really fun and engaging story with really interesting character dynamics, sort of the trio, and the way that they bounce off each other was really fun. So there's that. The last one that I read that had anything to do with the Springathon is The Overstory by Richard Powers. Finally finished this one off. I read this as a buddy read with Roxy. I will link her booktube channel below. So this is basically it's a generational and multi-character narrative about humans and trees and the way that we connect with the natural world. The structure is really skillfully done. I talked about this with Roxy as well. For me, it's divided into parts. It's roots, trunk, crown, and seeds. So in Roots, we are introduced to all of the 9 characters that we follow in this book. And with the Roots, you get the generational stories of all of the characters. You get to see their, like, maybe 2 or 3 generations of each of the characters and their family trees and family history and legacy. So that sort of makes sense. The roots signify the history of each individual strand of root. And then in the trunk, you get to see the way that the characters become intertwined and come together. So a lot of the connecting of the dots is happening in the trunk section. Their stories become entangled, they become stronger, there's more possibility for growth. And this one is much more hopeful. In the trunk section, the characters are sort of thinking about the possibility of change and in a new direction for the future. In the crown section, you see the individual characters separate again. At least most of them are separating again after the events of the trunk section. Something happens and they become different strands again, or different branches. And the crown section sort of reflects the characters having the viewpoint from above and being able to tell that some things are already too late and they will not be able to do the things they wanted to do and to have the impact that they wanted to have. But in the last section, the seeds section, which is very short in comparison to the other ones, you again see more of a hopeful tone, but the hopeful tone is sort of combined with the price that had to be paid in order to get there. So I feel like, I'm not sure if I'm making enough sense here, but basically what I want to say is that the structure and the sections themselves reflect the meanings in each of parts of the story. They become, they are quite pessimistic, they become more hopeful, they lose hope, and then at last they have won something through a very painful process of growth. So there's a lot of things in terms of the structure and in terms of the writing itself that I found impressive with this book. There's also a lot of things to do with the themes in the book that I loved. Really questioned the idea of our responsibility for nature and what is happening now with climate change, and how much how much responsibility we have in fixing things, in changing things for a future that we won't see ourselves. I don't really like any of the characters except for Patricia, but it isn't so much that I dislike them, it's more that I felt I didn't care about them. I felt distanced from them, and part of that is because the writing style of this is constantly sort of an epic narrative. You're constantly held at a distance, and it's also hard to sometimes understand the motivations for certain characters. Patricia is the exception to the entire book. I think a book this long with so much hanging on the human side of things, there's not enough of the human quality in this book to create a balance, I think. I feel like it's more an intellectually interesting book to read and to think about rather than an enjoyable story to hear. So that is my thoughts of the Overstory. One of the best things I read all year is A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry. I've also talked about this one in the stay-at-home book tag, I think. So this play is about a family who live in this small apartment, and they are waiting for a check from the life insurance of the grandmother's husband after he has just passed away. So this money that they are going to get is sort of the turning point in their lives, and they are trying to decide what to do with this money. But what this play is so well is doing so strongly is showing the similar to Tears We Cannot Stop, showing the emotional burden of racism and the lived experience of that, and how it works in structural ways, and is overpowering and sort of inescapable for these characters. But what I especially liked was the way that Lorraine Hansberry shows us how each individual character deals with their burdens in different ways. We have 3 generations of women, and they are quite different, but I just found these characters, the women in particular, so strong, and their dialogues was completely believable and fully rounded in such a short amount of time. I immediately believed in them, and I think that was one of the reasons I loved this play so much. I loved the dialogue and the bantering and the way that even though it's set in just one location, it feels like you have already gotten to know all of their previous life before the play starts, and sort of can see a bit of their future as well. I cannot recommend it highly enough, honestly. I feel like even if you're not a person who reads plays, like I am not usually, you must read this. Then I have 2 more books to go. Both I really enjoyed. First we have The Friend by Sigrid Nunez. This is a book about a woman who is friends with a guy who commits suicide, and after his suicide she adopts his dog, his Great Dane, and is in part talking about her trying to deal with the loss of her friend, and of trying to understand sort of his actions and trying to understand how he came to this conclusion. A lot of this book is told in a fragmentary style, which is usually not my kind of thing at all. I tend to be sort of off-put by a fragmentary literary fiction style, probably because I've read quite a few of those that I have not enjoyed. This one, I feel like sometimes I didn't love it, but it still sort of worked for me for some reason. There's a lot about in the fragmentary style that is about the process of writing and the work of an author, the work of a writer, of creating stories, of the process of reading and of interpretation and things like that. But the other part of this is about the dog itself, and how the dog is also grieving the loss of his owner, and the way that the dog reflects the woman's grief as well. So they live together in a really small apartment. She barely has the place for a Great Dane who is apparently Great Danes are like massive. I knew that they were big, I just didn't know they were that big. So I really enjoyed the parts about the dog. I tend to avoid books about dogs as well because usually something bad happens to them in books or stories in general, so I just have been avoiding that. But yeah, this was a surprisingly good book. I feel like I have a hard time pinpointing what I loved about this book. There was something about this that really clicked with me, and therefore I'm really interested in reading more of Sigrid Nunez's work. So if you've read any of her other books, I would love to know your thoughts. I am excited to, hopefully I found a new author to follow. And then the last one that I read in the month is If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. This is a new release by a South Korean author living in the US, I think, at the moment. And this book is about a few women's life in South Korea mostly, and the ways that these women's lives are impacted by norms and by standards and expectations on them, on women's lives in South Korean society. So some of the things are specifically related to beauty and beauty ideals, which I talked about in my Friday reads when I was still reading this one. There's talk about plastic surgery because a few of the characters have had extensive plastic surgery, and the way that they think of themselves as well is really interesting to me. The way that they think of their own beauty and the meaning of the beauty itself, and sort of what purpose it serves in their lives, because the women who've had plastic surgery are all escort girls in this book, or some salon girls, I should say. I feel like in general there were a few things, or quite a lot of things, that sort of harken back to Invisible Women by Caroline Perez, that I read for the BookTube Prize. There were a lot of things that reminded me of that book in this one. That people have opinions about whatever you do, and many of the things that these characters are experiencing as hardships is because they are women, and specific expectations on them because they are women. So some things are related to motherhood and when you are failing as a mother. Some of the things in this book is about sort of the women having a successful career and the fact that they have to give up relationships because they are successful themselves, and men don't want them to be that successful or more successful than them. So another thing I mentioned in the Friday reads was that I had a hard time connecting with these characters, and also that I had a hard time visualizing them. I felt like I actually did care towards the end and when they are more of a group. But I did still have a hard time visualizing them. And then I realized that that is probably part of the point, the fact that they could be anyone. A lot of the experiences that these women have are universal, or at least experiences that a lot of women have, and so it's not really meaningful what they look like. When they are referenced in terms of their appearance, it's only to make the point that they are beautiful and therefore looked at in a certain way. One of the things that I loved most about this in the end was the relationship between the women, and how it's a sort of a complicated relationships. It's both positive and supportive, but also cold at times, and has a sharp edge to it, at least in the beginning. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one more than I thought I would. So those are all of the books that I want to talk about in my June wrap-up. I feel like I've been talking for ages. So let me know if you've read any of these books and your thoughts. I would love to know, especially Frances Cha or The Friend. If you read something really good in June, I would also love to know about that in the comments. I hope you're doing well, and I will talk to you soon.